Good night to Morehead State and good morning to Bob Huggins and the West Virginia Mountaineers as WVU advances to the second round of the 2021 NCAA tournament with an 84-67 victory over Morehead State. And just as importantly, Bob Huggins, not yet officially a Hall of Famer, but should be a Hall of Famer and really is a Hall of Famer, ends up picking up his 900th career victory, doing it his way all throughout his career, finally getting that elusive and illustrious 900th career win. I'm your host, Mike Asti, and this is the NCAA tournament edition of our post-game show here on Pittsburgh Sports Live. And of course, this broadcast will also be available on WV Sports Now. And out of all the teams we cover throughout the Pittsburgh Sports Now family of networks, of course, Pitt at the mothership PSN, WVU, of course, Duquesne, Robert Morris, Penn State, St. Francis of Pennsylvania, all of them. Only one advanced to the NCAA tournament, and only one now advanced to the second round of the NCAA tournament. And to have this conversation, recapping the game, talking Huggins at 900, and discussing West Virginia now moving forward in an old school Big East battle with Syracuse as the Orange picked up a victory over San Diego State as they also advance. So West Virginia will now meet Syracuse in the second round of the NCAA tournament. And there he is. I will now welcome on Cody Nespor of WV Sports Now. Just finished talking with the man himself, the man, the myth, the legend, Bob Huggins, who picked up his 900th career victory in West Virginia's win. And Cody, this was a game the Mountaineers certainly were favored to win, because we'll focus on the game first here. Obviously, the Mountaineers were favored to win this game. That was the case. They were a 3 seed, Morehead State being a 14. However, many thought when the brackets were released, WVU maybe would drop to a 4 seed with how poorly they played down the stretch. The conversation of them being a 2 certainly went away, and they played themselves out of that. And you're just looking at the matchups and potentially that first round game and comparing Morehead State, who's coming off of a big upset conference title win over Belmont, who then gets snubbed, in comparison to Cleveland State, who Houston drew, that there was a difference between being a 3 or a 2, and West Virginia made themselves a 3, and we're lucky to be a 3. But Morehead State was a tough draw. They certainly were coming in red hot. And while WVU was the favorite, there were some that thought, okay, maybe this is a vulnerable upset. We've already seen Ohio State lose as a 2. We've seen a 15 over a 2. We've seen major upsets with a 4 seed also losing in the madness-filled first weekend of the return of March Madness. So there was some concern. And the way the game started, it was kind of back and forth early. Culver had a very slow start, struggled throughout that first half before eventually finishing with 12 points, 12, 7, and 1. But McBride carried them throughout. McBride with a 30-point night, 36 and 6, one of the better individual performances. Honestly, I want to talk to my guy John Antonic a little bit and see where he would rank in terms of individual point totals in an NCAA tournament game for WVU throughout history. 36 and 6, again, maybe his best game of the season, certainly best game of 2021, and certainly his best game in months for McBride. He kind of carried them through it, and then West Virginia just pulled away. Right away, what are your initial takeaways from this win? And I also want to ask you this, because this is a tournament. Are you feeling better about the Mountaineers advancing and making a deep run in this tournament now than maybe you were prior to the game? Obviously, they win, but the way the game that unfolded, are you feeling better about this team moving forward than you were prior to the game?
Well, I think, you were right. Morehead State came in, they won 19 of the last 20. They were very hot, a very different team than Cleveland State. West Virginia came into this game very cold. They lost 3 of their last 4. They got bounced in the first round of the conference tournament. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I think the betting line at this game was 13, which I thought was really too high. All week I've kind of been expecting a good game, and it ended up being a good game.
Yeah.
But in terms of moving forward, I don't know that that this game showed West Virginia any differently than we already kind of thought of them. I thought this is kind of just how they played all year. They're a little bit inconsistent. The defense is a little bit below average, but generally they make enough shots to make up for those two things. And that's really what they did tonight. The defense wasn't great. Culver didn't have a good, really night at all, but the first half especially. But Deuce McBride hit enough shots. Sean McNeil chipped in enough. Jalen Bridges was big tonight. They did enough on offense to make up for everything else. And that's why I think the last time I was on one of the postgame shows, I said I think their ceiling is high, but I also think the floor is kind of low.
Yeah,
just because they're not, it's not a technically sound kind of dominating team. It's the strong offense makes up for a weak defense kind of team. And that, going into this Syracuse matchup, I'm not real high on Syracuse, but they really beat up on San Diego State, which I wasn't expecting. So, I mean, certainly Boeheim and Huggins have history, so that should be a good game.
Oh, it's going to be a good game, and it's going to be intriguing to say the least. And the fans are already excited. You just look at all over social media. That shows you the allegiance to where the fans' hearts still lie, even with West Virginia now in the Big 12 and Syracuse in the ACC. Old school Big East matchup is certainly going to get people excited. Huggins, Boeheim going to get people excited. They've coached against each other for years. Again, old school Big East throwback, and two legends of the game stacking wins. It's ridiculous. We're looking at 2K between them combined. Oddly enough here, despite this show hitting up the channel and being fired off and going live after 1 a.m. So technically the next day from when this game started. Nonetheless, we have a chatter here, but just throwing some love to Bob Huggins with Mountaineer Pride. Let's go, which it's nice for WVU getting that love there, despite fans having to stay up to watch this one at 9:50. Hopefully the tip-offs aren't as bad here moving forward. At least give that as a present to Huggins to not have any more of these moving forward. I had to take a nap before this midday to chug some coffee and be ready for this one as we were talking off the air. But yeah, Cody Nespor, Mike Asti here. The Mountaineers advanced to the second round of the NCAA tournament, 84-67, a win over Morehead State. That final score I don't think is indicative of how close the game was at one point. Absolutely tip of the cap to Morehead State. A great season, an underrated team. I'm actually glad that on the pregame show that after Ernie literally said, we spend so much time talking about WVU, let's give some love to Morehead State. They're here too. Yeah. So they gave them a few minutes. That was nice. And they had a solid showing, but WVU eventually proved they were the better team. Before we do get to Huggins and his 900 wins, and then before we do get to that matchup with Syracuse, McBride, of course, 36-6. And while it was great from McBride, and this team certainly can win if McBride is playing like that, it's the best game he's played in months. I don't know about you, but I was a little surprised to see this from McBride. I'm not saying I thought he would suck, but he hadn't had a dominating game like that in a while. And what I'm mostly surprised by, 11 for 17. So the efficient McBride that we were used to back in December, November, back in 2020, he had a better 2020 than he had in 2021. And even when he was still scoring and still producing, last time you were on, we talked about how he could still be productive with assists, etc. 6 and 6 on boards and assists in this game. So it's not like he was doing nothing. That was kind of maybe being overblown and he wasn't fully healthy. But a game like this hadn't happened in a while, and he was really, really efficient. So were you at all surprised to see this from him? Because it did seemingly come out of nowhere. This is one of the better individual performances for a Mountaineer player in the history of the program, which is crazy to say.
Mm-hmm. No, I think at the end of the season, he was, as we talked about, very not efficient. But
right.
That honestly might have just been a product of they played so many games.
They did.
And I thought he was actually very, very good in the Big 12 game against Oklahoma State last week. That obviously they lost that, but I thought he played very well, especially that end of half sequence was maybe the best 12 seconds of basketball we'll see all year, where he had to steal the layup, the steal, and the dunk.
Yeah.
But no,
that was smart basketball too. That was NBA scouts will be impressed by that segment of basketball.
But I'm surprised. No, just because that Deuce has this in him. We've seen it before, and I that's just kind of how this West Virginia team is this year. Is one of the scorers is going to have a big game usually. Obviously, we've seen Sean McNeil have a couple, otherworldly shooting performances.
Sherman too.
We've seen Taz have games where he'll just come off the bench, take over. Certainly Derek. And so it was just kind of Deuce's night tonight. That's just kind of how this. That's just kind of how this team works. And we know he has the talent. We know he has the mentality and the skill set and everything to do it. It's just really maybe more so on the defense of who are they going to take away and who's that going to leave to have the big night. And tonight it was Deuce. And am I surprised that he stepped up on a big stage? No.
That's fair.
I'll say, Mike, you've been banging the drum on Deuce as long as anybody in terms of him being, a national star and an MVP type player.
Yeah.
Even as far back, I remember you did a show last year where you made the argument that he's the best player on the team. He's shown that really.
I'm happy you remember that because that's true. I did a show. I almost forgot. I did a show last year. So this would have been pre-pandemic. This is how ahead I was. I think, honestly, I almost jinxed it a little bit because I did a show. I banged the drum. I was doing the media car wash. I was on Metro News. And then all of a sudden, the pandemic, nothing even mattered. And then we get to this year. He was having a hard start, proving me right. I did another show about how he deserved national recognition about even more than what I said the year before. And then from then on, he was declining and I kind of jinxed things. So I'm happy to see this again. But I am happy, and those shows got some views, but I am happy that Cody Nespor, of all people, is remembering these takes of mine. And some have not hit over the years, but those have hit. I have been riding the McBride train for a while. So for sure, he made me look smart in this game. He has been a little inconsistent, though, in the second half of the season. I will admit, as much as I've been banging the drum as long as anybody, I was a little surprised from this, to be honest. Not that he wouldn't step up on a big stage, but that he's been inconsistent. And you mentioned he had stepped up and played better against Oklahoma State despite losing. So it almost seemed like he was due to have an off night. Granted, there was a week or so off. There was time off. They maybe had time to get ready. It wasn't COVID off, so there could be practice. So regardless, 36-6. If he does that every game, they're certainly going to have a chance more often than not. I will say, and this was mentioned on the broadcast, not to get too negative, because the one player that stepped up when McBride was slumping second half of the year, before they lost those back-to-back to OSU, and when they won 3 out of 4 against ranked teams, only that 1 point loss to Oklahoma being the only thing that tripped them up, it wasn't McBride leading them through those games. It was Derek Culver leading through those games. He was a double-double machine in those games. And after Oscar left the program, the rebounding touch really went on to Culver's shoulders. He got more minutes. He's been a part of the lineup being shifted that everyone talks about. Huggins doing such a great job this year to adapt. However, he finishes 12-7-1. Doesn't look horrendous finishing it out, but a real sluggish first half. I believe he only had 2 points that whole first half. Yep. He basically slept through it. There was even conversation on the broadcast. Is he healthy? That it also had been said in the Big 12 tournament, the game prior. He hasn't now really been good for probably 3 or 4 weeks now consecutively, and it's been inconsistent, poor play for him. Had a solid second half, but can this team make a deep run if it's just the McBride show, even as great as he's playing now, without Culver being more consistent and stepping up? Or if not Culver, does somebody else has to be the Robin to McBride's Batman? Can this be just the McBride show for this team to have a deep run?
Well, certainly. I think Derek's big thing is when he plays too fast, he has, halves like the first half tonight.
Right.
Where he's not recognizing when he's getting double teamed. He doesn't know where the help defender's coming from. He just barrels into anybody and just throws shots up. And that's what he was doing in the first half. And that's in the postgame. Huggins actually said that Derek was probably too nervous just from playing in the tournament, which I thought was surprising. You don't think
it's surprising for him to say that too, but it's fair, I guess.
But, you don't really Derek's still 20, 21 years old, playing in his first March Madness. Okay, he's nervous.
Right.
I get that. But yeah, his big thing is always slowing down. And it's kind of like what I said before is if a team decides that, all right, we're going to focus on Culver, they run their offense through Culver, we'll double team him every time. Then yes, somebody other than McBride has to step up. And I think that's where we've seen the games out of McNeil where he goes, 10 of 10 from 3 or whatever, or games from Taz where he can slash and everything. But So yeah, I don't think it can be all McBride. It was a little bit tonight, but I thought Jalen Bridges had a very nice performance. He hit a number of threes,
right.
and McNeil still scored in double digits. But I think it really just, if it was like West Virginia was running guys out there who couldn't score, then yes, it would be super important for Derek to have, double doubles every night and to be dominant. But because they have, these extra shooters and a guy off the bench, even, I think that takes some of the pressure off of Derek. But then, against a team like Syracuse, I think Derek's really going to be important.
We'll get there. Yeah.
Yeah. Obviously, with their zone, it's you can't really rely on just shooters. No, go ahead.
Yeah, for sure. And they have a deep team, and that's why they ended up as a 3 seed. That's why at one point in the year they were ranked 6th in the country. That's why they crawled from being unranked back to top 15, back to top 10. That's why it's been a roller coaster ride, but that's why this team has been able to have multiple lineups, deal with players leaving, and still end up where they are right now with already a win under their belt in the NCAA tournament. The Mountaineers beating Morehead State to advance to the second round matchup against Syracuse, the old school Big East throwback matchup, 84-67 over Morehead State. Cody Nespor, Mike Asti here on the West Virginia Mountaineers NCAA tournament postgame show. And as I said at the top before Cody joined me, out of all the teams we cover throughout the Pittsburgh Sports Now family of networks, only one in the NCAA tournament. Now, the only one with a win, so that's why it's not the WVU postgame show. It's the damn NCAA tournament postgame show, at least on PSL. So give them the DAP where it's due, and they're there, and they took care of business. The issue, though, could be, as you mentioned, Syracuse, maybe not the greatest matchup overall. Certainly will need Culver, maybe a team that maybe will be able to expose West Virginia not being as bulky and muscular as, say, some other teams. That could be an advantage for Syracuse. They did get a win over San Diego State. Honestly, I picked them to win that, just for full disclosure, but I wasn't totally confident. I could have saw them losing. Many thought Syracuse shouldn't even have been in the field and shouldn't even have been in the tournament as recent as a few weeks ago. But Jim Boeheim and Syracuse doing what they do, they crawl through, they sleep through the season, they somehow crawl in, and then they're making some noise. If Tom Izzo's not going to do it, it's going to be Jim Boeheim. One of the two of them does it, and Tom Izzo losing in the play-in game. So what are your thoughts on this matchup? I mean, everyone can talk all day about the Big East throwback matchup and how cool that will be, but Huggins is not going to care about that. He's going to care about trying to beat this team. Same with Boeheim trying to beat WVU on the court. And we'll kind of close things up with Huggins at 900. But on the court, how does this matchup shake out for you? And is this a scary matchup for West Virginia on the floor?
So I think this is interesting because, the 5 minutes of research I did on Syracuse at halftime, they don't have a ton of size this year. They don't play a very big lineup. But with that 2-3 zone, like I said, it is going to be important for Culver to play well and to be scoring. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, if Culver doesn't force Syracuse to kind of crash him when he gets the ball in the post, then they're just going to sit out on the perimeter and guard all the shooters. There's really, Deuce, but really nobody else on West Virginia team can create for themselves.
Right.
You know what I mean? They, like, West Virginia doesn't run any isolation or anything like that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, they have scores, but you're Sherman, McBride, outside of McBride, mm-hmm. Bridges, they need somebody else to get them involved in the offense. Usually it is McBride getting them involved, especially when he's playing like this, for sure.
Right. And so that's why I think Derek's going to be more important in this Syracuse matchup, just to be a threat. Maybe he doesn't score 15 points, but he has to threat. He has to draw a second defender in, just to help with that zone.
Does he need double digits in rebounds? Does this need to be one of those games where Huggins is going to say you got to bang the glass?
I would hope so. Just like I mentioned, Syracuse doesn't play a ton of size.
Right.
So even guys like, I think Bridges and Emmett Matthews are going to be important to get rebounds in this one. The saying is, sometimes the best offense is a missed shot. I think that holds true against a team like Syracuse. And then offensively, obviously it's Jim Boeheim's son, Buddy, who's kind of their star offensive player.
Right.
Like I said, I didn't really like Syracuse coming into the tournament. Just, what I've read and what I've seen from them is that they're kind of just inconsistent this year. And I think Buddy Boeheim, he's one of those boom or bust type players where kind of like McNeil, where so maybe he'll have an otherworldly shooting performance, or, maybe he just won't.
Right.
I'm just looking at his stats. He takes a ton of threes, obviously, but he's only shooting 37%. So it's not like he's, Syracuse has the record that they have for a reason. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and
They're
he's a
at
college
11th seed
basketball
for a
player.
reason.
He's not a guy that's going to carry you through a tournament all the way through. He's not somebody
Right.
that really has the next level in his sights. This is a typical. It's what Syracuse does outside of Carmelo Anthony. It's a Gary McNamara type player again. GMAC is his mentor for a reason. He's GMAC all over again, basically.
And that's the one caveat is West Virginia's defense, and especially sometimes the 3-point defense has been so poor this year.
Right.
I mean, if you give Syracuse 20 open threes, you're gonna lose. They'll hit open threes.
Right.
And that's, I mean, at times this year, West Virginia has played very, very poor perimeter defense. And you never really know. That's one of the biggest inconsistencies. It's just, how are they gonna play defense? How are their ball screens gonna go? Are they gonna stick with their man? Are they gonna switch correctly? Things like that. Or are they gonna give up a bunch of open threes? The second Kansas game sticks out to me, where the defense was just lost. They were barely guarding shooters and they lost.
That was bad. Yeah.
If that happens on Sunday, they're going to lose. If they can play pretty good defense, I don't, just from a talent standpoint, I don't think the Syracuse team is good enough to just kind of walk over them.
No, and I don't think they're going to overlook anybody. Huggins is not going to allow that, especially going against Boeheim. Oddly enough, Buddy Boeheim matches McBride, 30 points for him in their win over San Diego State. So a very similar spread, quite frankly, without the assist. So McBride doing a bit more. Buddy Boeheim putting up 30 points, 11 for 15. McBride 11 for 17. And Boeheim 4 rebounds, McBride 6. So very similar spreads for their first round victories. Again, he is a player that certainly, if you give him open shots, he can hit those open shots. They're not maybe as similar as Syracuse teams of the past with their size, but they play that same style. So you do need somebody that can bang the glass and get those rebounds. Culver will be important in this game too. I think West Virginia also could get in trouble if they allow those shots and they get down against Syracuse. They might be tough to come back against. So if Culver's going to take a half off, I think he's better taking a half off in the second half if they can get a lead and enter the half with a lead and hang on to it rather than sleep through the first half. And again, we don't know whether he's fully healthy. That's continuously being speculated. Maybe he's just nervous, as you alluded to, because it was his first NCAA tournament game. Very, very possible. And if McBride's not nervous, tip of the cap to him, but Culver could be. These are young kids. They're very, very young. And they didn't get to play in it last year. So they've now been thinking about it with pressure and hype. And they know the fan base really wants this for 2 years, not just one. And also pressure. Huggins also has said this the last few weeks that he just wants this 900th win the hell over with because he felt like there was pressure there. And they might have felt that too with the fan base, not wanting to have to go into a whole nother year at 899, especially after Huggins gets snubbed from the Hall of Fame. Cody Nespor here, Mike Asti, recapping West Virginia's first round NCAA tournament victory as they move on. The beat goes on to a Big East throwback matchup against Syracuse. Syracuse, of course, now representing the ACC, WVU out of the Big 12, but none of that matters in the NCAA tournament. Not going to matter at all. Nobody cares. Huggins versus Boeheim, WVU versus Syracuse, and people maybe should just also, what I want you to watch as motivation, did you watch the 30 for 30 on the Big East?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that should be motivation because listen to what Boeheim says about West Virginia in that 30 for 30. Listen to the clip West Virginia gets in that 30 for 30, the small blip clip that is less than programs that didn't get to a Final Four, that didn't win the conference, that weren't as successful, and then read some clips and read some articles about how Boeheim was part of the cut of that film. And then get pissed off even further and watch the game because that's going to be a great game. I would assume going to be a great matchup, win, lose, or draw. I'm excited to see it, but it's happening after Huggins gets 900. So that win won't be 900. That win will be 901, which will put him actually behind his mentor, Bobby Knight, one back of him right now, 2 back. Bobby Knight 902 at one point had the record, but Huggins 900. And the only thing Charles Barkley said that was kind of sound about West Virginia analysis was on Huggins. He maybe hasn't watched WVU all year, but he certainly knows Bob Huggins and knows his career. And Bob Huggins has done it his way. He has done it the harder way. I threw a tweet up and I stand by it. Out of everyone who's achieved 900 plus, his is the most impressive for me. Yes, others have national championships. Some have multiple national championships. Yes, others have more Final Fours, more conference titles, etc. But Huggins didn't do it at a blue blood program. Huggins didn't do it with All-American, McDonald All-American players year in and year out. He didn't have one-and-done players coming to West Virginia in this more modern era. He did it the tougher route. Cincinnati, Kansas State for a cup of coffee, and West Virginia. And as Charles Barkley said, these are not destination schools usually. If you're a five-star recruit who can go anywhere in the country, you're not sitting there saying, unless you love Skyline Chili and a beer or two, you're not sitting there saying, I got to get to Cincinnati or Morgantown. No, you're really, really not. And at one point with Cincinnati, it wasn't even really a legit conference situation. It's not like now. St. Mountaineers certainly had the Big East and now in the Big 12. But he did it his way. He did it. It's a tougher way. 2 Final Fours in the mix there. Does have a Big East championship in the mix of the gauntlet of the Big East. 900 career victories. Forget being snubbed from the Hall of Fame. He'll eventually get there. Should already be in there. Should have been there years ago. But just your thoughts on Bob Huggins as a whole. Is it possible, and maybe this is legit to ask because he didn't get into Hall of Fame again, is it possible he is among the most accomplished and successful, while praised by many, but also underrated coaching legends in all of sports? Is that possible? Is there credence to what I'm saying about maybe doing it his way and more impressive? What are just your thoughts on Huggins at 900?
Well, in terms of the guys with 900 wins, I think Bob Knight is the most impressive. Just, the first one to do it.
Yeah, it's fair. I mean, he has undefeated season.
It was a completely different era, yeah. But
right.
I mean, you look at the other ones, Krzyzewski, Roy Williams, even Jim Boeheim. I mean, they are at these blue blood schools. They get these McDonald's All-Americans. They turn out, NBA All-Stars. You look at Huggins' history, that's all missing. And that's something people sometimes knock him for is, he doesn't.
I mean, Kenyon Martin's really it, basically.
Yeah. But then you think about it, and it's like you're saying, he's won 900 games sort of in spite of that. Yeah. Right? Kind of against those odds of not getting McDonald's All-Americans and not getting NBA.
I don't think he even wants them. I don't even think he wants them.
That's right. And it certainly is weird, the perception around him, because you hear from, every coach, every player, everybody who's, even tangentially related to basketball says, yeah, Bob Huggins is a Hall of Famer. Of course he's a Hall of Famer. He should be in right now. And yet he just keeps not getting in.
And some of them vote. That's what I find funny. Some of these people got to vote, and they're sitting on TV saying, how is he not in the Hall of Fame? I want to say, can I poll your ballot? Did you vote? Because somebody didn't, and he didn't get in.
So I wonder, I honestly wonder if it's just a perception thing. Because, I mean, this is too far back for someone my age, but the stuff in Cincinnati with graduation rates, and obviously his DUI.
And how he left there,
Right. It's like, does that hold him back? But, even since then, the graduation stuff has been more or less debunked. And is it just...
I feel like, do casual fans even know that?
That's what I'm saying.
And I'm a little bit older than you, but I'm not much older than you. Like, I know about it, but I don't know if people even my age who aren't as into it and have a career into the sports would even know about that unless you brought it up or dug information out. I don't think anyone's talking about that while they're watching games at home.
But that's what I kind of mean is, because people, you're in my age, don't vote on the Hall of Fame, right? It's the old heads.
Sure, true.
I wonder, is their perception different of Huggins than, people in our generation? Because, I know Huggins from West Virginia mostly.
Right.
And, obviously the Press Virginia.
Me too. Yeah.
Yeah. And Deshaun and, all of that. That's what I know him for. And so that's my perception of him is the guy at West Virginia who builds these teams out of recruits nobody else wants and goes and kicks everybody's butt in the tournament.
And gets Javon Carter to the NBA with a legit contract that nobody saw coming years earlier.
And then I want to bring up one point that Josh Witt, he does Unreasonable Doubt, a podcast about West Virginia. He tweeted this out after the Hall of Fame vote, and I just thought it was great research.
Sure.
Eddie Sutton, 806 wins, 3 Final Fours, no championship. It took him 12 years after he finished coaching to get into the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
Lefty Drysdale, 786 wins, no Final Fours, no championship. 15 years after he last coached to get in the Hall of Fame. It's like, are you going to hold a championship against one of 6 guys that has 900 wins? Are you going to make Bob Huggins wait a decade after he retires to get in?
Yeah.
That
that's
would be insane.
The comparison with Eddie Sutton, and he's very underrated historically. I would imagine the casual fan probably is more aware of Bob Huggins than Eddie Sutton overall. But you mentioned Eddie Sutton's resume: less wins, 1 more Final Four, no championship, and also didn't have the benefit of blue bloods and All-American recruits. So that's a direct comparison. He is in the Hall of Fame now. So some could say, and John Chaney, another example of no championship, a lot of wins, again less than Huggins, of course. But everybody has less than Huggins except for the guys. A lot of people have less than Huggins except for Coach K, Bob Knight, Jim Boeheim, etc. That without a championship, and he's in the Hall of Fame. It also took him a while, and yeah, some have had to wait, but they're in. So at least the standard has been set that the resume with a lot of wins, with a couple Final Fours and no championship, is good enough to eventually get to the Hall of Fame, which is why I catch myself sometimes just calling him a Hall of Famer, because he's going to get there at some point based on that resume and that standard set. And he's probably going to retire with over 1,000 wins, because he doesn't seem like he's slowing down anytime soon. But without the championship, I don't know if that's all. Honestly, if that is, that's just asinine, because number one, it is incredibly difficult to win a championship in college basketball, maybe tougher than maybe any other sport. We could debate at that all day, certainly with how just chaotic the tournaments always are. And I think people are underrating the incredible disadvantage he's under by not having the one and done during a whole 20-year era. And maybe that's dissipating now with the G League and LaMelo Ball and all that. And that was a conversation Chuck and the guys had. But that was a thing that people won titles with for 20 years. Coach K complained about it. Then after Coach Cal won a title, he decided, I got to do the same thing. He won his championship or 2. Roy Williams the same way. I mean, there were coaches. Tom Izzo's another one similar to Huggins with less wins. He has more Final Fours. He has 6, I believe, and does have a national championship, but doing it without blue bloods, doing it without Mike Donald's All-American recruits. And it just is more impressive doing it that way for me. The only other argument would be in terms of more impressive besides Bob Knight, who has the undefeated season, and he also put Texas Tech back on the map, got them deep in a tournament, got them to a Sweet 16, of course did it at Indiana prior in the Final Fours and the national titles, and Isaiah Thomas. But to be fair, as a counterpoint, Isaiah Thomas, NBA Hall of Famer, Basketball Hall of Famer, was a high-level recruit that Bob Knight was able to win a title with, and that was his last one. So that shows you right there. But the only other one, and this will again segue into that matchup with Syracuse, the only coach that can say he did it more impressively in a way is maybe Boeheim, because yes, he stacked wins and people can say the schedule's been easy, but now you might see Syracuse as a blue blood. When he got there, they weren't. He made them into a blue blood, and he was with that program the whole time, sticking there, making them a blue blood and making them what they are. And he does have a national title. I will say, though, and he was in another one and lost to Louisville back in the late 80s and 86. He has a national title because of potentially the best one-and-done player ever, and I will say that, if not one of the best college basketball players ever, even with only 1 year of work, in Carmelo Anthony. For all the jokes around Carmelo, that year was out of control, and that's the only title that Jim Boeheim has. If he didn't get Carmelo there, and he's not from upstate New York, he's from Baltimore and has Puerto Rico lineage, it didn't make sense prior. So he recruited him, cool, but without Carmelo, G-Mac's not leading him to a national championship on his own. So he got one thanks to Carmelo. He does have one, though. Again, 900. It really shouldn't matter whether it's more impressive than Bob Knight, Jim Boeheim, or Coach K, for crying out loud. 900 wins without a ring should still be enough. If you look at all the other sports, a lot of coaches who have a lot of wins, even without a title, are still getting in the Hall of Fame. You can say Bob Knight's or Bob Huggins is not the GOAT without a national championship. Okay, you cannot put him on Mount Rushmore. Maybe you put him as 5 or 6 instead of top 4. Okay, but to not even induct the man is getting a little ridiculous. I am happy some guys like Chris Webber finally got their due. I think the Fab Five needed represented, but it's still crazy that Huggins is still having to wait. And everyone you hear everywhere on a local show, on a podcast, on national TV, player, you mentioned ages of us, older people who are well older than us that do have a vote that would remember the whole history and would remember 92 and would remember the DUI leaving Cincinnati in that controversy. They go on TV and say Huggins is a Hall of Famer. He's underrated. He's impressive. It's great. No All-Americans. It's fantastic. Andy Katz said the same thing today on TV, and yet somebody's not voting for him. So I'd love to uncover that type of journalism there, because we actually did a couple of the morning shows we're doing here on PSL. Mike actually said he was maybe going to hit you up and see if you could try to figure that out, because it is just one investigative piece to figure out how he's not getting votes. But I'll digress. The Mountaineers get an 84-67 win to move on after a first-round victory in the NCAA tournament over Morehead State. Any final thoughts, Cody, on the win over Morehead State, the matchup with Syracuse coming up, or even your thoughts for West Virginia moving forward in the entire field? Mm-hmm. They're probably going to be favored in this game against Syracuse, I would assume, but it's certainly no gimme. After that, you're probably looking at Houston, Baylor. The bracket did get easier, though, with Ohio State getting knocked off in terms of the overall region, eventually getting out of there. Who knows? But any final thoughts here for this edition of the postgame show? We at least got one more of these.
So let's I want to do Morehead State real quick. Sure. We got to talk to their head coach, Preston Spradlin, a couple times this week. He was very, very impressive. I like him a lot. When he was hired, he was the youngest head coach in the country. He was only 31. And something we had kind of fun with on Twitter was he was born after Bob Huggins.
I saw that, yeah.
Because Bob Huggins' first tournament appearance was March of '86. Yeah. And Spradlin was born December of '86.
Yeah.
And now I really like Huggins is going from that to coaching against Jim Boeheim, who's been to 34 March Madness.
Yeah, the only one with more experience in the whole damn field. Right.
That's the whole
tournament. Yeah.
So I like that. In terms of, I honestly think this region that West Virginia's in isn't the toughest one.
No.
Illinois, if they get up to Illinois, I think that would be a really fun game, just because they have what's their big man's name? Kofi Cockburn. I like him a lot. I think him and Derek would match up very well. But looking ahead a couple of rounds, Houston would be fun. I think they're a pretty good team.
I think I want to see that matchup just because of the whole conversation of who deserves the 2 seed. Houston's schedule not as tough as WVU. I want to see that prove it. Yeah. I want to see that. Yeah.
But let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Sure, I am not getting ahead of myself.
Isn't going to be easy.
No, it is not. It is not. And my bracket's quite frankly busted at this point. Anyway, I have the Mountaineers advancing from the Syracuse game. Not much further, but I'll just say that's where the bracket is. Yeah, it's not going to be an easy game. It's going to be a fun game. I mean, in all honesty, you just look at the ages. You look at the fact that we're in a global pandemic. You never know with the ages of these guys. You never know if they're going to choose to retire based on just wanting to preserve themselves. Probably more Boeheim than Huggins, of course. He obviously is older. You never know. So in all honesty, and this is serious because they're not in the same conference anymore, anytime you get Huggins versus Boeheim, it could be the last time you ever get Huggins versus Boeheim. Certainly could be the last time you get a big game with Huggins versus Boeheim. And this is the NCAA tournament. So very likely you're never getting the two of them to coach against each other in an NCAA tournament or a postseason of any kind, not being now in the same conference. And another chance of conference realignment is still years later. So with the age, I don't know if Boeheim even makes it to that point. Again, this could be it. This could be a wrestling angle. This is a matchup you may never see again. And while the WWE may lie and throw it in the next month in a pay-per-view that no one's going to watch, this one is serious. You may never get this again. So this seriously could be the last time. And I'm sure they're both probably excited about it as well. And Buddy Boeheim and McBride, watching those two is going to be cool. Buddy Boeheim, the coach's son, that'll be probably an eye roller, and some jokes will happen on Twitter during the game. And Boeheim, I'm sure, will freak out. One of my first viral tweets years and years ago, if you remember, is when he took his jacket off in anger and I threw up side by side of him and Michael Jackson when Michael Jackson let the jacket go off in the air.
Yeah.
And that hit the viral wire. But it's going to be an interesting matchup. The Mountaineers will be favored, and they have certainly impressed from this game against Morehead State, but it's a whole different animal against Syracuse despite a down year. Certainly the way they play, it'll be tougher. You got to have more from Culver for sure. And you can't always figure to get this type of game from McBride. So you got to get more from the rest of the team as well. It'll be interesting what type of starting lineup they put out as well, because Taz and McNeil have kind of flip-flop who gets in the starting five and who is that six-man role. It was Taz as the sixth man in this game. McNeil played well. Taz only 9 points, so I don't think he played himself out of it. But the matchups will dictate that, and they both have been good in both roles. And Taz has thrown up 25 points in a game earlier this year. So it's not like he can't score either. As you mentioned, there's depth there. There's depth in scoring. McBride can do more than just score. Really, the only player that didn't give it his A game in this one really was Culver. But you got to figure more will come from him unless he really isn't healthy. Maybe shake off the nerves. Who knows? 900 now is over. That'll do it for this post-game show, this NCAA tournament post-game show here on Pittsburgh Sports Live. Smash that subscribe button. Help us get all of our content here on the channel to you. And also follow at WV Sports Now and hit up at WV Sports Now over there on the website for all the post-game reaction coverage right now Cody's putting up on the site, including Huggins videos. We'll get him also here on Pittsburgh Sports Live and reaction from anybody else that he was able to take part in those Zooms. West Virginia gets an 84-67 victory over Morehead State. The Mountaineers eventually pull away. They get the win. They take care of business. Bob Huggins gets 900 out of the road as well. And they don't have to travel. It's a bubble. So they're staying in the same city, and they're moving on now to an old Big East throwback matchup against Syracuse. So after a year of getting nothing, we're now getting spoiled with potentially the last Huggins-Boeheim matchup ever, and potentially maybe one of the best games of this tournament, certainly for its history, and a Big East throwback with West Virginia and Syracuse. So I'm excited. Mountaineer fans, I'm sure, are excited. Syracuse fans are excited. That game will happen, and Cody and I will now get some sleep. All right. Thanks, man.
All right. Thanks, Mike.